I've owned animals long enough to know when something's wrong. A sick steer hangs back. A horse limps. A dog avoids the water bucket. But Chester, my prize Yorkshire, wasn't sick. He was focused, obsessed, like some engine stuck on one gear. For 3 days straight, he worked the same corner of his pen, snout to dirt, shoulders pumping, throwing soil behind him in a steady arc that dusted the fence. The morning it finally got to me. The light came thin over the ridge, and the whole ranch looked bleached and tired. I walked out with coffee and a shovel, planning to regrade the hole again. Behind me, the house sagged the way empty places do. 6 years since Ruth's funeral, and I still reach for her mug some mornings. I told myself Chester was bored. Pigs are smart. Give them a puzzle. Chester, I called. He didn't turn. He pushed hard, breath whistling, as if on a deadline I didn't know about. The hole was deep enough now that only his back and ears showed when he bent down. I'd filled it twice the day before. He cleared in an hour, ignoring feed, water, even the hot wire I strung across that corner. When I cut the wire to drag boards over, he pressed against my leg like we were teammates. Then he sprang back to digging. I tried feed again, sweet slop and apple peelings. He sniffed, returned to the dirt. I rattled the grain scoop. Nothing. I climbed the fence and dropped into the pen, boots sinking where he'd churned the ground soft. Enough, I said, and took his collar. Chester weighed more than some calves. He planted his hooves and leaned into the earth the way a man braces into a wind. I hauled and scolded and swore. He grunted once, short, refusing, and kept going. That's when I heard it. A sound I'd never heard from a pig. Not a squeal, not a warning, not the happy chatter over corn. It was a raw, small cry, almost human, torn out of him and dropped at my boots like a confession. It hung in the air and made the hair rise on my arms. He didn't look at me. He pushed his snout into the dirt and made that sound again, softer, like he was asking me to understand. I let go. Something cold slid under my ribs and stayed there. Animals don't invent grief. They react to it. Chester wasn't eating. He wasn't resting. He'd rubbed his skin raw where a rock met snout, and still he worked that spot like a wound that wouldn't close. 3 feet down, maybe more. What could a pig smell that I couldn't see? Unease pooled in me the way water finds a low place in a pasture. It wasn't just a noise. It was a steadiness, the tidy purpose. If Ruth were here, she'd have said, "Trust the animal." She loved simple truths I couldn't hold. She would have told me to listen. "All right," I said, and my voice sounded older. "You win." I climbed out, went to the truck for the long-handled spade, and came back. Chester stepped aside half a foot, enough for me to stand where he'd been working, like a partner making room. The dirt was soft, damp where his breath had warmed it. I set the blade and pushed with my boot, and the earth gave way with a sigh. The shovel bit, and I started to dig where the pig insisted. The first shovelfuls came easy. Chester had already done the hard work, loosening clay and roots with his snout. He stood beside me, huffing, his sides heaving like bellows. I thought he'd wander off to his feed trough once I took over, but no, he stayed fixed on the hole, eyes dark, body tense, as if waiting for me to reach something. 6 inches down, my blade scraped cloth. The sound froze me. I crouched and brushed dirt with my hands until a patch of faded fabric showed through, rough wool, mottled by decades in the ground. My throat dried. For a moment I convinced myself it was just an old feed sack someone buried. But as I pulled more soil away, the cloth curved over something solid. I dug faster. Chester grunted low, urging me on. The fabric tore under my fingers, and pale white gleamed beneath. Not stone, bone, a rib cage. I rocked back on my heels, my heart hammering. I'd seen enough dead livestock to know the difference between animal remains and human. This was no cow or horse. These were ribs, delicate but unmistakable, arched in a shape meant to guard lungs that once drew breath. Jesus Christ, I muttered. Chester gave a sound halfway between a sigh and another of those eerie cries. He nudged the soil back from the bones with his snout, careful as if grooming a newborn calf. I swallowed hard and kept digging, though every stroke of the spade fell heavier than the last. Soon more bones showed, sternum, clavicle, scraps of rot-eaten shirt, and then a flash of metal. I pushed her aside and lifted it free, a tarnished badge, its stars still sharp beneath corrosion. Across the middle was engraved a name, Marcus Webb, Sheriff. 1923. My hand shook, so bad I nearly dropped it. A sheriff, buried under my pig pen for 100 years. I stumbled out of the hole, badge clutched tight, staring at Chester like he'd dragged me into some nightmare. The pig stood calm, expectant, as though this was exactly what he wanted me to find. Back in the house, I rinsed the badge under the tap until the letters gleamed. Marcus Webb. I knew that name. Around here, folks still told ghost stories about a sheriff who vanished in the early 1920s, leaving a county in chaos. Some said bootleggers killed him. Others whispered cattle thieves. No body was ever found. I tore through the cabinet where I'd stashed Ruth's genealogy work. Old family photos, brittle deeds, a yellowed scrapbook of obituaries. My fingers worked on their own, flipping pages until I found what I feared. A picture of my grandfather, Jonas Marsh, standing proud in front of a new barn in 1923. Handwritten on the back, the year everything changed. I thought of the journal I'd once seen among my grandfather's things, the one Ruth told me to keep safe. It was still up in the attic. I'd never read it. Chester's cry echoed in my head, that strange, broken sound that had pushed me to dig. My family land had been whispering secrets all along. I just hadn't wanted to hear them. But now the sheriff was back, and with him came questions Marsh couldn't afford to ignore. The attic smelled like old hay and dust. I pulled the string for the bare bulb and found the trunks Ruth had labeled in her teacher's hand. Marsh Family Papers, 1900 to 1950. Chester thumped below. The sound climbed the joists. I kept the sheriff's badge in my pocket, cold as a coin I shouldn't have taken. Photographs first, stiff portraits and snapshots. Jonas Marsh, my grandfather, filled a dozen frames. In 1922, he stood beside a tired team and a sagging barn. In 1923, he wore a new Stetson, a new bar on his back, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. In the margin, my grandmother had written, "The year money found us." Ledgers next. Ruth had tucked slips where she planned to ask me questions. April 1923. Feed bill paid in full, cash. May. 2 milkers purchased outright. June. Loan extended to a neighbor, interest forgiven. Before that, the column starved. After, they strutted. At the bottom lay a narrow, cracked journal. Jonas wrote small. Fences fixed, windmill squeaks. Coyote took a calf. Then mid-1923, the voice changed. Webb sniffing around again. Says he has lists. A page later, Pike says keep calm. And on a July date circled hard. The same week Ruth's clipping said Sheriff Marcus Webb vanished. A sentence that knocked the wind out of me. The Webb matter is settled. I sat on the floorboards, the bulb humming. Settled. Was a word my grandfather used when a calf stopped thrashing or a bill got collected after a winter of excuses. Here it was followed by a long scratch of ink, as if even on paper he didn't dare write the truth. In a pocket at the back, I found a photograph. For men by the brand-new barn, Jonas, my great-uncle Eli, a third I didn't know, and a deputy in a starched shirt hat low, his smile wrong. On his badge, blurred by time, the letters P.I. were still readable. Ruth, I said to the dust, you tried to tell me. I took the journal and the photo downstairs. Outside, the light had gone hard. Chester stood where I'd left him. He wasn't digging. He watched me, patient, as if waiting to see whether I'd pretend I hadn't read what I'd read. I see it, I said. I dropped into the pen and scraped back more soil. The spade kissed thin boards, slats, not coffin wood, splintered and damp. I cleared with my hands. A rotted scrap of shirt, a brass button, the dull glass face of a watch. Webb had been planted fast, not laid to rest. At the edge, my fingers found the heel of a boot. I stopped while rising. It would be easy to call the county now and let strangers write the story. But I wasn't ready to surrender the only thread I had, not until I understood how deep it ran to my own people. Chester made that low, throaty cry then did something new. He turned from a hole and looked toward the old barn, rebuilt twice but standing on the same dirt. He took 2 heavy steps, looked back, and waited. Both kinds of digging, huh? I said. I tarped the grave, weighted it with sacks, drove a T-post at the corner. Then I pocketed the badge and the journal, and followed a pig who wouldn't stop until I did, down into ground and back to my own bloodline, to whatever my family had buried and called settled. The barn loomed against the evening sky, bored silver by sun and storms. I hadn't used it for much besides storage in years, but Chester waddled straight to its sagging doors like he had business there. He butted the wood once, snorted, then looked at me. Fine, I muttered, setting my lantern on a beam. Let's see what you're after. Inside, the air was thick with hay dust and the smell of oil. My boots scuffed against old plow blades and coils of rusted wire. Chester went to the back wall, the one built from newer timber in 1923, and pressed the snout against a wide board. It sounded hollow. I fetched a pry bar, worked the nails loose, and pulled until the plank grown free. Behind it was a small cavity, just big enough for a man to stash something he never wanted found. Inside sat a box, cedar gone gray, the lid bound with twine so old it snapped in my hands. The first thing I saw was paper. A half-finished letter on sheriff stationery, Marcus Webb's name inked in a firm, steady hand. July 7th, 1923. To whomever finds this should I not return. The words trailed, as if interrupted mid-thought. Beneath, folded neat, were notes in another hand, Jonas Marsh's. Webb too close. Pike says tonight. Must be done. I sat hard on a crate. Jonas and Deputy Pike. My grandfather and his sworn protector, conspiring together. My family's legacy wasn't sweat and cattle after all. It was blood. I dug deeper into the box. Receipts for shipments never logged. Initial scrawl beside numbers too large for one ranch alone. Cattle rustling. I whispered. It wasn't boys chasing a stray steer. It was organized theft. Whole herds disappeared. Profits split. And when the law sniffed too close, the lawman himself was buried. Chester nudged my knee. I set the badge beside Webb's letter. The lantern's glow turned the metal star into a ghost light, a reminder of the man who had tried to stop them. I thought about Jonas in his Sunday suit, shaking hands with neighbors, sitting at church with his arm around his wife. All the while he carried murder in his chest and called it prosperity. A wave of shame hit me, so hard I bent forward. The barn that fed my father, the land that raised me, it was all fertilized with secrets. For a moment I wanted to put it all back, nail the plank, walk away. Pretend Chester had never dug, that my shovel never touched bone. But the pig stood there, steady as if saying, not yet. I gathered the box, the letter, the notes. Every piece of rot my family had tried to wall away. When I stepped out into the dusk, the ranch looked different, smaller, the sky wider, heavier. I understood then. This wasn't just a hole in my pen or a secret in my barn. It was a wound running through a century, and it had chosen me, through a stubborn pig, to tear it open. I went back to the grave at first light. Chester came with me, shoulder to my thigh, quiet as a dog that knows when to heel. I folded the tarp and climbed down. I wasn't hunting more bones. I was searching for what the doom tucked close. Webb had hidden a letter in my barn. Maybe he'd hidden something with himself. I pressed along the wall of the hole. My fingers found a seam, harder clay, of 4-inch shape. I dug until my nails burned and freed a lump wrapped in oilcloth black with time. On the grass, I peeled it open. A small leather pouch lay inside, tied with thread stained the color of dried blood. Papers inside, edges wax-sealed. The top packet held photographs, sepia minute pens and rail cars. In one frame, a brand burned dark. In the next, the same flank wore a new mark. A freight agent's cap reappeared in 3 towns. And there, leaning on a corral rail with that wrong grin, Deputy Pike. Under the photos, a map, county lines spidering into neighboring states. Pencil crosses dotted sidings, stockyards, ranches like mine. Arrows ran along train routes toward distant markets. Initials sat beside some dots. Not just JM for Jonas Marsh. Half a dozen families I knew from sale days, a bank president, 2 freight clerks. At the bottom margin, ask Wadsworth Ree, governor's office. I sat in the dirt with a map in my lap. Webb hadn't tugged a local nuisance. He'd pulled a net. Herds weren't vanishing. They were being laundered, brands altered, papers switched, schedules nudged, until stolen beef stepped off a rail car 2 states away wearing another man's name. Profits rolled downhill fast enough to raise a new barn and teach a man to smile while hiding his eyes. The last bundle was a list, names, dates, payments. Next to some, a small cross. One line, Pike, greased a conductor, $400. Another, Marsh, holds gate 3 nights, pays hands cash. And lower, if I don't make Sunday meeting, send to the papers. M.W., I looked at Chester. He'd gone still, the way animals do when the air changes. For months, I called this ranch the last honest thing I owned. Now I held proof its foundation was mortared with someone else's courage and my people's fear. Silence would be simple. I could tuck the pouch back into the ground and let another century pass. But the arrows on that map ran through towns where kids still rode school buses I waved at. They touched families who clapped my shoulder at church. Whatever this ring had been, its descendants grazed the same grass. If Webb's notes were true, my grandfather hadn't ended anything. He'd just learned how to live on it. Ruth would have said, "Do the right thing and let the right thing do the rest." I don't believe in slogans. I believe in fence tension and rainfall and deck columns that refuse to shrink. But I believe in work. Webb's work lay in my hands, and he was dead because of it. I photographed every page with my phone, slid the originals into freezer bags, and tucked them inside my jacket. I didn't know who to trust yet. I only knew this was bigger than a grave and a guilty name. "All right, partner," I told the pig who had dragged the century forward with his snout. "We're not bearing this again." I drove into town that afternoon with the pouch on the seat beside me, wrapped in an old feed sack. Chester stayed behind, pacing the pen like he knew I was carrying his burden now. Martha Kellerman met me at the Historical Society office, a 1-room brick building stuffed with more dust than books. She'd taught Ruth in high school and after the funeral. She was the only one who'd ever come by just to sit quiet and drink tea. If anyone could help me untangle Webb's papers, it was her. She spread the photos and maps on the table, adjusting her glasses, her mouth tightening line by line. "I've seen whispers of this before," she said. Little notes in courthouse ledgers, a mention in an old diary. Folks always told me to leave it alone. I asked her why. "Because the families in these documents," she said, tapping Webb's list, "still run half this county. Pike, Wadsworth, Hensley, Marsh." She looked up at me and hesitated. "Your people, they've held the sheriff's office, the bank, the water board. When someone tried to write about this ring 20 years back, his truck accidentally rolled off a bluff. Another historian vanished. Folks say he moved away. I don't believe it." Her words landed heavy. I thought of Chief Raymond Pike, great-grandson of that deputy, shaking hands at the 4th of July parade, the man who'd signed off on patrols when kids went missing from migrant camps. Webb's map had his blood all over it. "What happens if this gets out?" I asked. Martha leaned back. "It won't be a scandal. It'll be a war. These families don't just have money. They have deputies, lawyers, judges. Exposing this will mean choosing sides. And you'll be marked the moment they know you have it." I stare at Webb's handwriting. Ink faded but legible, stubborn as bone. "Then maybe I shouldn't keep it here." She nodded slowly. "Make copies. Send them far. State archives, federal investigators, newspapers. Somewhere out of reach." That night, I stayed up at the kitchen table, running my old scanner until the machine wheezed. I filled a flash drive, then another, then sent files to 3 different email addresses I barely used. I even printed hard copies and sealed them in envelopes marked with no return. Every move felt like dragging a plow through stone. My grandfather's face hovered at the edge of my mind, smiling in that 1923 photograph, as if daring me to ruin everything he'd built. But Chester lay against the porch, snoring deep at peace the first time in days. His work had carried me this far. Now the rest was mine. I stacked the copies, set aside the pouch, and looked out at the night. The ranch was too quiet. Somewhere in the dark, I felt eyes on me, patient, waiting. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down I knew the past doesn't stay buried, and neither do the men who profit from it. They came after midnight, 3 trucks rolling slow up my drive like they owned the gravel. Headlights cut the yard into white knives. I killed my lamp and stood at the window with Webb's badge in my palm, the metal hot from my hand. On the porch, Chester rose from his bed and blew a warning through his nose that I felt in my ribs. Door slammed, boots on wood. A fist hammered my door like it meant to split it. Marsh, a man called, voice easy as a Sunday handshake. It's Chief Pike. Open up. We need to clear up a little misunderstanding. I opened the door and left a chain across. Raymond Pike stood under my porch light with 2 deputies and a pair of men I didn't recognize. He had the kind of smile that lives beneath a mustache and never reaches the eyes. The family resemblance tugged at my gut. Same hat tilt as the deputy in that 1923 photo. Evening, Chief, I said. Evening. He lifted a paper in a plastic sleeve. Warrant to seize stolen historical property. Signed by Judge Wadsworth. You got some documents that belong to the county. Behind him, a deputy shifted his jacket. The print of a pistol bulged hard. I have my property, I said, and I'm more than happy to show it to the state investigator who asked for it, not you. Pike's eyes sparkled like someone had told him a joke. State investigator? Tobias, you've been reading too many stories. You got scraps pulled from a hole and the fever dreams of dead men. We'll take it from here. Chester stepped off the porch and planted himself between us, square and solid, ears forward. One of the strangers snorted. Pig, he said, and went to move him with a boot. Don't, I said. The word came out flat and old. The man looked at me, measured the ground, and stopped. Pike leaned his shoulder against the post. This is me being neighborly. We haul the papers. You keep your fences and your quiet life. You keep your name. Or you get difficult. And I promise you, the next few seasons will be a drought you don't come back from. Ruth's voice ghosted in. Do the right thing and let the right thing do the rest. My hand shook and then steadied. You're late, I said. The evidence is out. Copies to the state AG, a federal office. 3 newspapers out of county. There's nothing in this house you can bury that won't sprout again. A deputy stepped toward the door. Chester stamped and let out a sound. Low, rumbling, not quite a growl, not quite that human cry. It pinned something loose in me back into place. I slid the chain free and stood in the doorway, Webb's badge visible in my fist. You gonna shoot your way through a pig and a widow's husband, Chief? I asked. Over a century-old murder, you weren't even man enough to commit yourself. Pike's smile thinned. You think this is about 100 years ago? This is about now. You brought a flood into men's kitchens. You brought it into mine. We stood there breathing, the 5 of them and the 2 of us, and in the stillness, I heard my phone buzzing on the table inside, insistent. I didn't move to get it. I kept my eyes on Pike. He flicked a glance at the windows, calculating angles like a rancher counts calves. You're trespassing, I said, and you're being recorded. It was true. I had my phone camera propped against a sugar jar, red light winking. You lay a hand on me or that animal, it'll live longer than your badge. The man to Pike's left shifted again, impatient. Chief. Quiet, Pike said. He took a step up, close enough that I could smell tobacco and aftershave and the metallic tang of a man, trying not to sweat. Last chance. Already took it, I said. Hours ago. For a moment, everything hung. Then a sound threaded the night that didn't belong to my county. Sirens, distant and many. Not the lazy whoop of a single cruiser, but the fast, layered wail of people who had somewhere be and paperwork to wave when they got there. Pike didn't turn his head. He watched my face, and whatever he saw there made his jaw jump. He stepped back off my porch. This isn't over, he said. It's the first time it's ever started. I answered. Chester stayed between us as they went down the steps. The trucks turned without haste, taillights winking, dust rising like the past does when you make it move. I stood in the doorway until the last glow was gone, the sirens drawing nearer, the badge cooling in my grip. I dug the hole. Now the storm would fill it. I put my hand on Chester's neck. "Good boy," I whispered and felt him breathe. By dawn, the yard was full of vehicles I didn't recognize. Black SUVs with antennas, a pair of marked cruisers from the state line, men and women in jackets stenciled with 3 letters that don't usually bother with cattle country. They moved with quiet precision, collecting every scrap I had copied, photographing the barn wall, measuring the grave. Chief Pike and his deputies never came back. They didn't get the chance. Before noon, the feds had them cuffed on the courthouse steps. The charge sheet ran longer than a branding tally. Conspiracy, fraud, obstruction, murder. Whole branches of families I'd grown up seeing at auctions and potlucks found themselves staring down indictments. Turns out Webb's pouch, coupled with what I copied and mailed, was the lever the government needed. And once one man flipped, the rest toppled like rotted fence posts. News vans rolled in from the city. For a week, the ranch looked like a fairground. Every camera wanted a shot of the pig that wouldn't stop digging. Chester didn't care. He stretched in the sun and chewed lazily at hay. Work finished. Folks laughed about it on television, called him the hog who solved a century-old crime. But I knew better. He hadn't solved anything. He'd carried me to the hole, and I'd chosen whether to keep shoveling. When the last car left and quiet returned, I walked back to the pen. The dirt was smooth, Webb's bones carried away for proper burial. I leaned on the fence, badge in one hand. Chester came over, snorted once, and settled down like a man laying off his season. His eyes closed, peace written across his hide. The county board asked what I wanted done with the land where Webb had lain. For once, the answer came easy. I signed over 5 acres by the creek, where the grass grows tall. They're calling it Marcus Webb Memorial Park. The marker will stand higher than the barn ridge, carved with his name, so no family ever calls him settled again. I still wake sometimes hearing that sound Chester made, the broken cry that pulled me into the dirt. It doesn't haunt me now. It reminds me. A man can inherit land, barns, debts, even sins. But guilt doesn't have to be passed down like a brand. You can choose to carry it into the light. I rub Chester's ears and tell him he did good. He doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. The ground already spoke. Justice doesn't rot. It just waits.